stayed a rapid supervisor and then woke up.
Okay, Eric, what do you got?
Looks like a busy weekend. Starting Friday, inmate Taylor down in J4 tried to hang himself. They put him upstairs on a watch.
Each morning, the mental health staff meets to discuss inmates who are in crisis.
Inmate Waller was placed on observation status for possible psychosis. He has not been med compliant with his Risperdal all weekend.
Okay, anything else on any of these folks?
There are at least 2 others that are on their way here that have put toothbrushes up under the skin in their arm. The difference is that Taylor had 2 toothbrushes up his arm, and they were only able to retrieve 1. The other one started to scoot up out of sight, so they're just monitoring that at the present time.
Amen.
That ball.
When inmates need acute care, they're brought here to the prison infirmary.
Brought me up here on constant watch because they was afraid I was going to do something, and they thought I was either going to try to kill myself or seriously hurt myself again.
I think my meds need changed.
Well, they've already decided to do that. It might take a few more days for that to take effect for you. So we'll talk to you some more later on and see how that's progressing for you.
Hey, Waller, you seem kind of upset. I'd be willing to talk to you and maybe we can resolve all this.
Resolve what? And I was doing fine, working in the kitchen and this and that, and I go see this, whoever this other psych doctor is, and...
Have you not been taking your medication? Is that true?
I don't feel I need it. And
Providing effective psychiatric care in a maximum security prison is extraordinarily difficult. Many patients decompensate and become extremely depressed, hopeless, suicidal. Many turn to severe self-mutilation or acts of self-injury. And many inmates that also suffer from severe mental illness become delusional and hallucinate.
Langston, can you hear me?
Robert Bankston, a paranoid schizophrenic, was brought to the infirmary when he became psychotic and started banging his head against the wall.
Bankston, R151-686. The nurse states that he's having a psychotic episode. Medication has been administered. At this time, have officers restrained an inmate on the gurney as it become necessary to do so. He'll be placed on the cell 18, D1 infirmary, and placed in restraints.
I've dealt with Bankston in crisis a couple of times, and I think the biggest problem that we had with him was complying with the medicine that we were trying to provide for him. He would just take it whenever he felt like it. Sometimes he wouldn't. And then perhaps when he became sicker is when he decided to not take it anymore, which seems to be the normal course for a lot of the mentally ill people. They start getting sicker and they think it's the medicine that's making them sicker, and they quit taking the medicine. And if they're not on mandated medicine, then they continue to decompensate further.
The medical staff decided to keep Bankston in the crisis unit on constant watch. But he continued to refuse all the officers' orders to cuff up, so the prison's special response team was called in.
Bankston, give you a direct order to step up here, turn around so handcuffs can be applied.
He was also given emergency medication to help with possible psychosis. At approximately 7:10, I went down to check inmate's file to ensure that chemical agent can be used on him. I'll be here to monitor use of force.
Officer Fraser, be shield.
I think the first thing that people should realize is that the prison doesn't exist to provide mental health treatment. The prison exists to provide security and safety to the community.
Officer Van Sickle, lower right.
And so you have to be realistic. If there's an inmate, even though he's sick, refuses to come out of his cell, refuses to allow officers to inspect their property, refuses to comply with orders, and stands fast to that, eventually that inmate is going to do what they're told, whether they want to or not.
Give you another direct order, step up here, Bankston.
You guys ready?
Sir, please.
Soon after this crisis, Bankston was placed on mandated meds and forced to take his medication until his condition stabilized.
I snatched a purse back in 1989. If I'd have knew I was gonna have to go through all this, boy, I wouldn't, believe me, I wouldn't have never snatched no purse. But, yeah, it's classified as a robbery.
Because of his long history of psychotic and aggressive behavior, Robert Bankston has served much of his time at the maximum security prison.
Many severely mentally ill inmates have come into prison either on minor violations of the law or on parole violations, and they were previously at a minimum or a medium security prison. And because those prisons have their own strict rules and guidelines and expectations of compliance with security protocols, those inmates with serious mental illness just can't follow the rules appropriately. They're frightened, they're scared, they're paranoid, they're anxious, they're pacing, they're restless, they don't take their medications, and then they filter down to prison like this, which is kind of like the basement for the severely mentally ill in Ohio.
Concerned that too many mentally ill inmates were ending up at its maximum security prison, Ohio began to take mental illness into account in their disciplinary process.
The biggest change that we started to pay attention to when we looked at certain kinds of behaviors prisoners were demonstrating that may have been psychiatric, but it may not have been. We wanted to understand the theory, and I'm not trying to be crass here, the difference between mad and bad. You know, we wanted to know if behavior that resembled deviant behavior was related to just criminal kinds of activities, or if it was induced by some mental illness.
You're in trouble. You might have to wait a few minutes, all right?
Michael Shreves, in prison for aggravated robbery, was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He was recently charged with spitting on an officer. Before his disciplinary hearing, Shreves is meeting with a mental health counselor. If mental illness is found to play a significant role in his misconduct, the charges can be dropped.
So the big issue is about the officers accusing you of spitting on him.
See, what it was I'm walking myself, he grabs the back of my jumpsuit, throws me on the ground. I was trying to get off me, I didn't do nothing.
While you disagree with what he said, you do remember the incident,
yeah, right? I'm not spitting on him.
Right, but you do remember the incident.
Yeah, because he said to me, do you spit? I said, I don't spit.
Con?
Yeah.
Come on in here.
No, we're starting lunch already.
Shut the door, shut the door.
Okay.
Michael Kahn, in prison for rape, began to yell when he couldn't reach his parents on the telephone. He threw his glasses on the ground and emptied his shampoo bottle all over his cell.
Case numbers 200040368. State your name and number for record.
Michael David Kahn, 234609.
Con, how do you plead to a Rule 18?
Guilty.
Con, at this time the committee is going to allow you to make a statement.
Dr. Martin was going to keep me on level 2 for 1 year or so, and get special permission from Steve Dillon to have my TV as well as my fan trimmers in my cell while being on level 2 till I show some improvement. What happened, I ignored the fact, but the mister are not realizing the fact.
Con, what does that have to do with this conduct report? What I want to know is what took place during the time of this conduct report. I don't want to know what happened when you was talking to Dr. Martin.
Michael Kahn was found guilty of creating a disturbance and destroying state property. Although he could have been sent to segregation, his only punishment was to have his phone privileges revoked. And Michael Shreves was also found guilty. It was his 18th rule violation this year. and he was sent to segregation.
I see a parole board in March of 2005.
If an inmate spits or refuses to hand back his food tray or curses an officer or doesn't cuff up when the officer says put your hands out, cuff up, if that person was in a hospital setting, that would be considered acting out or symptomatic of the illness. In a prison system, that's considered, I'm telling you to cuff up or I'm going to write you up. They write them up. They go before a tribunal, a disciplinary tribunal. They're found guilty and they're sent to segregation. Probably the worst thing that could happen to them and to the system, but that's what happens. That's what happens.
It gets to the point where there's nothing else can be done. You're going to have to lock them up in segregation. They have to be locked up and removed from the area, or it's just going to escalate. It's going to cause a bigger problem in the block, and then you kind of lose control of everything in the block.
A lot of the mentally ill inmates that are in here, you got to use more. I mean, you do have to use force on them. It just seems that way to me. It does anyway. Because once they get out, and then they get out, once they reach that level, they're out of control. Then they need to be secured.